Good morning, everybody. It's nice to be here again with you today. We are doing a lot of hard work this week, and we were able to put a few photos up to see all the fun that we are having, and I really love that Shivani ma'am was able to get some photos up of us. But what I really want you to think about is just like what we thought about yesterday with the video, right? What do we see happening in these pictures? We see community, we see creative thinking, because you all came up with some innovative ways to make sure that those charts got filled out, despite my own glitches in giving you papers that were going to blow. We see joy, I hope, in the classroom, right? So we balance this with what we need to cover for materials, but it is not only now, what if we had 3 times the number of people, or what if I had a room full of 100? I could still do most of the activities that I do with you all. I could still do most of them. For example, I would just need some more copies of these charts, but I can multiply that by as many as I need to. The turn and share, the think pair shares, all of those things can be done. Even with our desks being this way, we were able to turn and form groups that worked fine. So we sometimes have a block in our minds about saying, well, I don't think I could do that with more numbers, or I'm not sure I could do that with X, Y, Z. And I always ask myself, sometimes that is true. I don't mean to back us into a corner of absolutes, but I also believe that when we are creative and critical in not in a critiquing way, but in a way that holds things up, that we can find ways to engage no matter what. And we're going to continue to think about that for the next couple of days as well with the materials that we'll be presenting. I also wanted to say this. I do believe that the work we do together and the work we're doing this week and the work that I present is hard work. I think that all of us in some way or another will be working with others into our future or in our present time. And when we have to, or when we get to, think very thoughtfully and mindfully about our positionality in a classroom or in a group of people or as students or as teachers, it forces us to look at ourselves. And that can sometimes be very challenging. We must examine our own positionality when we do this work. I've been doing this work for 40 plus years. So it comes a little more easily to me, but even so, it can be hard. I am in India right now, so when we talk about culture and context and positionality, I need to always be asking myself, who am I in relation to you? Okay? So when we are in a classroom together, that's what we ask of our students, and it's what we ask of ourselves. So I don't pretend that this is easy work. I think the questions that you all asked yesterday, some of you were asking questions about what do we do with the kinds of diversity that I would be promoting, right? Clearly I promote a sense of diversity because it is one of the ways that we can achieve equality and equity and justice in classrooms. All of the philosophies that we've been learning, all of the theories, and we're going to see more today, ask us to consider diversity in the classroom, equity in the classroom, and inclusion in the classroom. But I do not pretend that this is easy work. I don't, and I sometimes come across like I do. I sometimes say, well, just do this or just do that. Or you could do these 3 things. But I don't really believe it's that easy. What I do believe is what I said yesterday, I believe, which is this. If I try, I'm better off than I would be if I hadn't tried. Is it harder to accommodate many, many different forms of diversity in the classroom? Well, it's harder when we think about what I need to think about as a teacher, but it might be easier for me if I can open myself up to understanding what I believe, right? So what is my philosophy? So I used the examples yesterday that I hope did not offend anybody, but the examples of teaching boys versus girls, or in America, the issue of race, right? Like, we know that there are discriminatory practices towards certain marginalized groups. And we can say in a classroom setting, oh, that's terrible. I would never actually say to anybody, I hope, that I would find you so challenging to teach that I wouldn't want you in my classroom. But the reality is that there are sometimes, for example, disabilities that may be very challenging within a classroom setting because of the way the setting is set up, or because of the numbers of students in a class, or because of factors that may be beyond our control. So I always want you to know that I don't believe in black and white, either or. I always call it painting myself into a corner. You can certainly see that we all could paint ourselves into corners, which is why we do this. Okay, and again, if I can get partway there, then it's better than if I didn't look at all. All right? So I just want to say that because I do believe that this is challenging, and we're going to continue to challenge ourselves. We're going to continue to challenge ourselves today and tomorrow, and part of that challenge is not necessarily about the intellect, but about the spirit, about our philosophies, about what we believe or don't believe. And sometimes it can be very hard because it's like looking in a mirror and saying, well, I did believe this or that, or well, I have done that before. I've been there. I can speak from many years of experience, but I can tell you for sure I could fill a class time of the mistakes I've made, or my own implicit biases that I didn't examine early on in my career. I can certainly share that, but what we want to do is say, how do we keep making the world a better place? How do we keep finding our own positionality in that world? So that's where we're going to keep moving forward with and thinking, and I hope that those questions not only cycle through for this week, but also continuing. Remember, on the first day I said, I actually hope people leave with more questions than answers. And actually, I really do believe that. I find myself, when I learn, saying, what are my questions? Or what else do I still need to learn? So I'm also learning from you, and your questions have made me think. I go home, I think about the questions that were asked. I think about, did I answer that okay? Was I too this way or too that way in thinking about this question? And so you all also help me. And today we're going to think a little bit about those theories of sociocultural and critical sociocultural practices. Okay, so let's move on. Today we're going to be thinking a lot about inclusion and also about different forms of theories of learning. So we're going to start with some of the intellectual material, and for some of you who have been in psychology, my guess is that this is not the first time you've seen this. For some of you it might be. For some of us it's a review. I made sure that I did a complete review of my own learning about these things. So we're going to start with the idea of behaviorism, and behaviorism is something where the key idea is that there's a change in observable behavior resulting from stimuli. So I can actually, this is based a lot in rewards or punishment, right? So when we think of people that are key in this field, we think of Pavlov. You all, what's the connection to Pavlov? Does anybody know? Yes, classical conditioning. And classical conditioning, we think of Pavlov's dogs, right? Like if you've ever had a dog, or even, so I've trained my cat at home actually using classical conditioning. So you use food as a reward, and you can teach tricks and so on. Well, we use this with children as well. We use reward, punishment, we use grades to help modify behaviors and so on. And we react, and as we grow, we learn. So this idea of classical conditioning is learning through association. We associate something with that learning. We want to get it. We want to get that piece of food, metaphorically. We want to get a good grade. And we get conditioned over years to respond in those ways. And then Skinner was operant conditioning, where we learn through reinforcements. And reinforcements, yes. Did you have a question? No. Oh, you did not. Do you have a comment? No? Do I have something that you need to, was there something on here? No? Okay, all right, sorry, I thought I saw your hand go up. Okay, all right. So positive and negative reinforcements, and we often say, at least I don't know if you know this expression here, but there's a very common expression, bad attention is better than no attention at all. So in raising kids or in being in classrooms, when a child is acting out, very often they're seeking that attention. And so one of our responses is to punish or to say no or to give a negative reward. But that rewards the student. So one of the things that I've said over the years, from, again, everything from first grade, I mean, my first graders were a group of, I had a very large class of really wild kids, and I would say to them, if you need my attention, can you find a better way to get it? And I used to say that to my own children as well. And so eventually my kids, my own children as they were growing up, would learn to say, I need attention now. And I would say, thank you for using your voice to get attention, okay? Because otherwise they would act out in some ridiculous way. And I would say, that's not a great way to get my attention. There are better ways, okay? Because the fact is that bad attention is better than no attention at all. Very often, people in classrooms will act out, but it tells us something. It's not only saying, I need some attention, but it may also be telling us that they've gone into, and we're going to talk about Vygotsky in a minute, but it may also be telling us that somebody is kind of in that fight or flight zone. So all behaviors tell us something. I'm not saying to excuse all behaviors. I'm not saying all behaviors are okay to tolerate in a classroom or in life. I don't believe that. But I also believe that those behaviors tell us something. So the other thing that I've often said to kids or adults or my students is when they're in a place that feels like they're behaving in a way I don't think is appropriate, the other thing I'll say, one thing is, can you say this in a way I can hear? The other thing I'll often say is, that must feel really bad inside you right now. We don't want to do, it can't feel good that that's your choice, right? That your best choice is to act up, or your best choice is to break down, or your best choice is to yell, or your best choice is to put your head down, or your best choice is to run around the room. When those are your best choices, it's got to feel pretty bad because you have no other choices you feel you can make at that time. So when we talk about these kinds of conditionings, we can see how it happens in our world around us when we interact with other people. And here, the focus is really on observable behaviors. What do we see happening? Because we don't know what's going on in somebody's mind. We can only see what the behaviors are, okay? And then learning here is really seen through behaviorism as more of a passive process. There's a stimulus, you respond. There's a stimulus, you respond, okay? So we're going to move beyond this, and I have a chart up here that we do not need to really worry about, but here's the dog kind of getting a reward. It's hard to see a little bit. Rewards and punishment for doing something well. You feel good when you've gotten a reward for something you've done well. And then aversion therapy is intended to associate something bad with something you want to break, like let's say the habit of smoking, and so maybe you get zapped, or I don't know. But aversion theory is to try to get you to stop doing a bad behavior, right, through a negative reinforcer. So we do see this played out sometimes. That theory, we're going to keep moving beyond this, though. And some of you, again, have probably heard of Piaget. My guess is most of you have. However, and in the next slide when we talk about, or I think it's the next one, when we talk about Vygotsky, I'm going to spend a lot more time in that spot. Because some of you may not have heard of Piaget. If I come into this classroom and assume that you have, some of you may feel a little bit lost. And when you feel lost, you may behave negatively. Now, I may not see that negative. You may just turn your brain off, or you may pull a phone out and start playing a game, or you may actually get up and leave, right? Or whatever it is that you need to do because I've kind of thrown you off a cliff, I think of it, okay? We're going to circle back around to that idea. But my point is that Piaget is a very well-known psychiatrist, psychologist, I guess you'd say, philosopher, educationist, right? And most of you have probably heard of him, but we're going to talk in a minute about the zone of learning. So Piaget's key point of learning is that learning is an internal process of organizing our information. And it's influenced by our prior knowledge and experience. We're going to start to see how these things, how these theories build. So one of my favorite things to think about is schema theory, and we're going to do a little exercise in just a moment. Piaget says this. Now remember, what we did before with conditioning was that I'm just looking at your behaviors outwardly and seeing you react to something. So Piaget is a little bit different from that. Piaget says, yes, we are reacting to things, but we're also taking it in and we're attaching it to what we know. And when we do that, we're building schema. Okay, we're building schema. So we have cognitive structures. Those are structures inside us that are building out these networks to help us make sense of the world. So we've moved a little bit beyond the idea of conditioning to now how I actually think and process and organize the world. Okay? When we train a dog, I'm not sure that they're necessarily mapping the new to the known and I'm not sure they're thinking through on this higher level of thought. We know that humans do. Okay? Humans actually take it to that next level. So we're not just reward and punishment now, we're organizing things inside us. And Piaget identified a number of stages of development that I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about today. And unfortunately, this is a little bit blurry to see here. But these are some of the stages that, and again, if you know a little bit about Piaget, you know that, for example, sensory motor, the first thing kids do, right, is they want to taste they put everything in their mouths because it's sensory learning. And we have 5 senses, and one of our senses is taste. So it's very normal for babies and toddlers to put things into their mouths. Does anyone have any stories about anybody, a child that you know that may have put something in their mouth like in an odd or different way, or like that surprised somebody? Or have you ever felt like you really wanted to taste something even though you know maybe you shouldn't? So I live near the ocean, right? And so we have seaweed. And there's just such a temptation for me, even at my age, to want to taste the seaweed, even though I know it's going to be disgusting. Because taste is a very important part of our sensory. When I was very, very little, I have a memory of being in about kindergarten, and along a hallway in the school was a display of children's work that had been done in chalk. I have a very distinct memory of this. I was only like 5 or 6 years old. And so we were walking through the hallway, and there were these chalk drawings from children. And there was pink chalk and blue chalk, and I could not resist. I started going down the wall licking, putting my finger on and licking, because I had to taste those colored chalks, which is ridiculous because they don't taste like anything what they look like, right? The pink didn't taste any different from the blue, and it all tasted disgusting. But I have a very clear memory of one of my friends then saying, like, "Ew, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm tasting the chalk." So we have our sensory input, touch, and hearing and sight. So when we have students who may be down a sense in some way, like for example, my daughter who's visually impaired, she might use her other senses. It's not that she's better at her other senses, it's that she's using those senses to get a grip on the world. So she used to, when she was first learning to crawl, she would find patches of light or maybe the way the reflection is, and she'd go over and she'd put her forehead down on it. So that was a way of touching, and to touch with her forehead was very safe. When she met new people, she would grab their hands and smell them. I didn't teach her to do these things. That's sensory motor. She's just taking senses in as much as she possibly can. She's already down a sense. She's trying to figure out this world around her, and so she'd go up to total strangers and smell their hands. And I had to explain to people, that's just my daughter figuring out the world. But it's a little bit, also had to teach her, you can't go through life smelling everybody's hands. But when you're 2 and 3, people are pretty tolerant of that. And then we move through and we have Propositional, so we start to say, okay, now I can talk about what this is. I start to have a concept for things. We move into being able to understand concrete and operational stages. I'm not going to get into all of these. And then formal, so this example is used with water, where I can name water, I can manipulate water, and I can think about water abstractly, right? So we move towards this higher level thinking. And it is developmental to a point. So Piaget's stages of development are very helpful for us. Now, I don't tend to be a stage person, meaning that I don't think it's necessarily, and I don't think Piaget himself would believe this, but I don't think necessarily that we're in stage this, and then we all of a sudden have entered into this, and we all of a sudden are into this. I think life is a lot more complicated. I think we tend to do this, right? And we wander around, and we find something new that we didn't know before, and then we get to the next thing. And that's really more about how we learn, is we are moving, but we're kind of doing it in a pretty messy way because we're humans, right? So it's helpful to know about stages, but we always have to remember that stages are what we call a construct. It's a heuristic is a word that we might say, which is a holding place in your head. So we're using a lot of constructs today to think about, and we're going to use a lot of metaphor today. It's a holding place, but it's incomplete. It's incomplete. I always want you to think about that because I use a lot of imagery and metaphor, but you have to remember those are always limited, right? Our brains are doing amazing things, our bodies, our emotions, our souls, okay? So, but Piaget did believe very much that learning is active and developmental, and that we build knowledge through interaction with our environment. So when my daughter is putting her head down to feel a patch of sunlight, she's interacting with her environment. And that environment has provided her with that opportunity to put her head down. The more she's out and about with people, the more she learns about that world as a child. Okay, I'm gonna keep going, okay? And we're gonna do a little exercise here around schema. So I hope I can do this right and that this will still pick up on the video. So let's see if I can get this right. So let's start by thinking about a young child learning about whales. Okay, I don't know, it's just something that maybe, let's say we're in second grade, what I would call second grade, you might call class 2, class 1, and the teacher says, I'm going to do a unit on whales, because whales are pretty incredible, aren't they? Does everybody know what a whale is? Okay, just making sure. Now notice something, if we're multilingual, one of the things I always check is that people are okay on vocabulary. That might have seemed like a silly question, but if you grew up speaking Hindi or Marathi, a whale may not be a word that enters into your everyday conversation. So I do double checks, and I do this at home. I mean, I do this anywhere I am, anytime I'm teaching, because we don't want to assume knowledge of a word that somebody may be lost in, right? So if somebody's saying, I don't know what a whale is, what does that mean? What word is that in Hindi or whatever, right? So let's start with the first thing a child is going to think of typically is what? When you say whale, what's a little kid going to say? Ocean, exactly right. So the question is, where do they live? And whoopsie, hold on. How do I, oh, there we go. That's what I need. Thank you. So now we put in, I'm going to put water here for a reason, because now I can divide out water into ocean. And there's also fresh water, like lakes and rivers and streams. Now here's where our schema is starting to go to work. Okay, now remember, when I say schema, it's a construct. Our brains are actually doing multiple layers of this all the time. So let's take a first grader, we say whale, and they go ocean, they live in the ocean. Or they say they live in water. What kind of water? Well, now we have to think about what the ocean is. Now this is a pretty hard concept for anybody, okay? I know kids that are 10 years old. I have a little tiny cottage on a beautiful little lake. It's a freshwater lake. One of the first questions they ask is, are there sharks and whales in this? No, because we're not at the ocean. Well, does it have tides that go in and out? No, because we're not at the ocean. Well, now that's an odd thing to try to explain to somebody. That's water and this is water, but they're very different kinds of water. But whales don't live in lakes, they live in the ocean. So now we may have to do a whole unit on oceans. And I don't have room on here to put it in, but we might have salt water, properties of ocean water, tides. And now that's going to take us into moons and moon cycles. And oh my goodness, where do we even start? Because we started at whales. All right, so let's just not get ourselves too confusing. But my brain is going like this. Fresh water, oh sorry, I spelled that wrong. Lakes, rivers, streams. Now I've got a whole pile of bodies of water that go into infinite numbers of other possibilities. Okay, the other thing that's happening is I wonder what else lives in or near water. So now I'm talking about biomes and biospheres and natural kinds of, beavers live near water. And so on. Okay, what else about whales? One of the other first things that a child is going to say is that they are a kind of a fish. They are a big fish, okay? Just bear with me. Bear with me for a minute, okay? Because we're now going to say that a whale is a fish, because kids always say that. And now we say to them, well, no, actually, that's not entirely true. I can't remember why I have this arrow here, but we're going to say fish have certain characteristics. Oh, I know where I have it. So now we say to kids, well, no, fish are a little different. Fish aren't, and then we say, well, a whale is kind of like a big fish, and so we have some similarities, but we also have some differences. I'm going to see if I can find. So what is a whale? A whale is not a fish, it's a mammal. Now, if you're a 7 or 8 or 9-year-old child, that's it. But what is a mammal? And also, that's a word you don't go around saying. You're not like saying to 2-year-olds, let's go be mammals today, right? You're just saying put your shoes on, right? So little kids know the word shoes, but the word mammal is a very specific kind of word. It's a very academic word. We don't go around saying, when was the last time you said mammal to anybody? Does anybody have any time that you've said mammal in the last, 6 months? I can't think of it. I never have said, I just don't. So it's a very academic word. So it may not even happen until they get to school, or unless they've gone on a trip or had the experience or gone to an aquarium where I don't think they have whales, but anyway, they might learn about mammals, right? Mammals that are in the water. So a whale is a mammal. Well, now that leads us to all sorts of other things, which is that mammals have certain characteristics. And then we have to ask ourselves, what other animals are mammals? And when it really starts getting weird is when we say we're mammals, and our cats and dogs are mammals, right? And things like that. So now we've got to, and I'm going to insert because one of the things that schema also does, we are building the new to the known, okay? So with our schema, we also have to learn that a fish is not a mammal. Okay, so not only are we learning that a whale is a mammal and a fish is a fish, but we also have to learn that a fish is not a mammal. This gets think about what that means in our brains to be able to do this work, right? And then when we talk about characteristics, then we start to get into, and I don't remember what this box was supposed to be for. I think it's like cat, dog, and so on. So, but that comes under what other animals? So maybe specific, we might even have exceptions here, right? Platypuses, right? Platypuses are the exception to everything. Do you know what a platypus is? Okay, all right. Platypuses are weird little things, so they don't fit very comfortably, right? So that's going to bring us all. So anyway, we're not going to talk about platypuses to our 2nd grader, okay? Because they're just going to have enough trouble wrapping their heads around the fact that a whale is not a fish, okay? But we also can keep doing lots of other things. We can do size. So we said big fish, right? So we can talk about large, and we can even do size comparisons. How big is a whale in comparison to a goldfish? How big is a whale in comparison to us? How big is a whale in comparison to an elephant, right? So when we're talking about size, it's very hard to, unless we've seen one in real life, it's very hard for us to have some sense of what that means. This is how schema works, but remember, this is an extraordinarily simplified version because our brain is really kind of exploding, okay, all the time. And when we're working with anybody, including you right now, we're hooking into other parts of our schema. When I'm learning to eat Indian food with my hand, I'm building new to the known. What do I know about how my hand works? What do I know about the substances on my plate? I mean, you might laugh, but this was a new skill for me a handful of years ago, and I have worked on getting better and better at it, and I actually am pretty proud of myself. But here's a funny thing. Thank you. I've actually gotten very good. I can even eat rice with my hands now. Yay, go me. However, the funniest thing about that is that when I was 6 or 7, I was told, don't eat with your hands. Eat with your utensils, right? So what my schema says is eating with my hands is not good manners. But now here I am in a cultural context. So we're going to keep talking about this idea of cultural context. Context is everything, right? So we're going to keep going with this, but let's just for a minute stop and just remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about schema. We're talking about the fact that our brains are constantly doing this and that we could take on every single one of these. We can keep going. And children will, so will adults, many of us, we will also be wrong sometimes in our schema. We will come to believe something that we then have to figure out is actually not true. When I was growing up, for years and years, I always thought that cats were all female and dogs were all male. Did anybody else believe that? Because honestly, and why do we believe that? What did our schema tell us? Why would we ever believe that? Yeah, so we think of cats as being sort of feminine. They're smaller. They go meow, meow, right? And dogs are whoa, whoa, and they're bigger. I mean, for the most part. But then again, right, you can have a small dog. What's a child going to say? Oh, look at the kitty cat. No, that's a dog. No, that's a kitty cat. Why? Because it's small. Yes, but dogs have other characteristics. Now we have to start doing all of that, right? So we've mixed up. I mean, for years I thought cats were all girls and dogs were all boys. It didn't dawn on me that cats could be boys and girls and that dogs could be boys and girls. That's just a classic example that I think I'm not alone in, right? Because I can see that I'm not, in the way that my schema built out. I was building what I knew on top of, I was building what I didn't know on top of what I did know. And we often are wrong. Can anybody think of a time that you thought something that was just completely incorrect, but you really believed it? Or how about a word that sounds like another word? Can you think of anything? I'm putting you on the spot. I bet if I gave you time, you could think.
I have one. I always thought vividly would mean it's very blurry, but actually vividly means they remember it exactly.
Exactly, kind of the opposite. So you always thought vividly meant kind of blurry. Why do you think you thought that?
Because vaguely is also there.
Vaguely, vividly, right, okay. So you were tying onto a schema that said vaguely sounds like vividly, right? Okay, do you see how errors teach us? Errors are only schema that got ourselves mixed up somewhere. So that's why if I can figure out why she thinks vividly means vague, I can start to work with that, right? If I'm in a classroom setting and I say, wow, she's really not paying attention, or I can say, wait a minute, that kind of makes some sense, right? Kids make mistakes like that all the time. My kids growing up, one of my kids, I don't remember which one because there's 5 of them, one of them at some point started calling hotels hotowels. Because why? What do we, at hotels, what do you always have? Like these nice fluffy towels that are all stacked up nice and neat and warm and fluffy towels. I have no idea, but in my kids' head, we were going to a hotel because they had these great hotels. Okay, so for years, even to this day, we call hotels hotels. We're going to a hotel now. But that schema, trying to do its job, that schema trying to tell us how do we, you all know the chain Pizza Hut? So one of my kids called it Pizza Hut, which makes a lot more sense when you think about it than Pizza Hut, right? These are schemas going a little wonky, but also doing some amazing work. And the beauty of the human brain is that we can do this work. That's really astounding stuff. How many of you have ever watched a young child start to learn to speak language. Raise your hand if you've ever watched a child learn to speak. Okay. Here's what's amazing. The errors that those kids make are tied to schematic lessons. So in English, one of the very common things that kids say is, it's your birthday today. What's your name again? Say it again. Sunat. Sonat? Sonat. Sonat. Am I close? I'm close. See, my schema does not allow for certain sounds because it's dropped some sounds. And if you study language, that's just a whole other thing. Schema works for everything, by the way. So it's your birthday today, and somebody offered you a little flower, right? Yes. Okay. Who offered you, and what is your name? Kushmira? Sushmira. Sushmira offered you a flower. Now, if you're a little child with that little flower, you say, I bringed you a flower. I bringed you a flower. That's brilliant stuff, because that child never heard the word bringed. What word did they hear? They didn't hear bringed. They've never heard that word from the adults around them, but they created it all by themselves. And they created it based on what rule? What do we do with verbs? We add ed for the past tense. We add ed for the past tense. Even a little 2 or 3 or 4-year-old child will know that we add ed for a past tense. Absolutely brilliant. The next time you hear any child making any kind of a grammatical mistake, remind yourself that child's brilliant. So I bringed you a flower, and then we say, no, honey. We don't say bringed, we say brought. Well, they don't learn brought. The next thing they learn is brang. I brang you this, right? So they've learned it's not bringed, but now what are they doing? Why would they think it's brang? What are some of our sang, rang, ring, rang, sing, sang. So now they've learned a new pattern. So their schema says, I've got a new schema piece. And my new schema piece is that when we have ing, we turn it into ang. Again, they've never heard brang. They just say it. It takes a lot of years to get to brought. Okay? So we can see schema at work in almost anything. We could come up with countless examples, because this is thousands of things happening all at once. Yes?
So I just want to share one experience. I mean, the small kid, those who are on feeding. I don't know how many of you have experienced that. For some reason, by default, they start, when they don't know how to pronounce the things.
Yes.
It is very small, like 1 year or 2 year or less than that even. So they call the water first is mum. Yeah.
Is mum?
Mum, yeah.
Oh.
Water we call either pani in Hindi.
Pani.
Or jal, right? But then they don't know how to pronounce and what are the meanings of these words. They don't even know the term water.
Really?
So
Okay.
Mom by default. I mean by birth.
Really? And you all have heard this?
Start speaking.
I did not know that.
As growing up, I mean in Indians, I mean we talking about the India.
Yes,
We
exactly.
call the small infant we will call mom. And the moment they start growing and learning the words water, pani, then they will start calling it when they start speaking, properly.
Yes, right.
They will start saying it pani. Mummy, I want pani.
Right.
Otherwise, till then, they always used to say it mom. So
Why? What's the connection?
No idea. Maybe the schema works here. Like
The
moment
schema-
you got to know the term water, the term pani.
Mom.
Pani. Otherwise, before that.
Right, there's just nothing in its mum. Any ideas of what the connection is?
Yes. Because I have seen my nephew saying that, and even
Maybe it's something connected with the mother. Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So I try to connect that with the word mummy or mama.
Right, exactly. That's what
I
I,
know that because my nephew calls, they know English. I mean, my mother, my sister and Jiaji, they speak English at home. But then my nephew, he calls his mummy, my sister, Maji, Ma.
Okay.
He doesn't call mummy.
Oh, so it's just-
They have learned, but they still say it. So
Right.
it's not like
My observation is that children have various ways of associating, especially when I see when they're adopting 2 languages.
yes,
My daughter has started using Hindi words in English.
yes.
Especially, and when I tell her I will speak completely in English,
Oh.
Hindi, she says I like to do that.
Oh,
I cannot add that.
so she's doing it intentionally.
Put a verb of Hindi.
Yes, yes,
Mama, I'm
yep.
plowing this. So
Oh.
she's too much into craft. So I tell her that can you just break it from the
Yeah. So that's an intentional breaking, right? So actually riddles and jokes are very often based on on an intentional disruption in a way, right, of schema. So it surprises us because there's a jolt there. So we could spend a lot of time talking about schema. It's really fascinating stuff, and it's hilarious to watch when kids are starting to do some of this. But even in classrooms, when somebody makes a mistake, I say, I know why you made that mistake. If I don't know, I can ask, what is it? What's your connection? So the idea of vividly with vaguely is like, that's something that's really interesting, isn't it? We're thinking about the way a word gets formed. Okay, so let's keep going here. And I think about schema. You've probably seen this slide before, but I think about schema. These are my own images. These are my own metaphors. These are not anything I borrowed from anybody. It's just me. I think of schema in two different metaphors. The first is a coat hook. And the coat hook is that we have to attach our knowledge to something we already know. So think about let's pretend that I have a little coat hook. You know what a coat hook, right? A hanger for something. Let's say that I have a coat hook right here. Just pretend that I have a coat hook right here, okay? Now, you come into the room and you have a coat on, or I hand you a coat, and you say, okay, and you go to hang it up. And if there's a coat hook there, it stays. But if there's no coat hook there, it drops on the floor. And now I say to you, pick it up and try again. You pick it up and try again. It still falls down. Pick it up, try again. It still falls down. It will keep falling down indefinitely until we get a coat hook. There are times that we punish a child, or punish, that's a tough term, but maybe a poor grade. Maybe we think they're not appropriate for some other class. Maybe we say they're not appropriate for our class. But what we forgot to do was give them a coat hook. You can tell a child till the cows come home, do this math sheet. You're not going out to recess till you do it. You're not going to pass this class until you do it. You're just asking them to keep putting a coat up with no coat hook. So instead, we say, what do you need for the coat hook to make this go? Maybe what you need is a different math sheet. Maybe what you need is some review of some basic math facts. Maybe what you need is something different from me just yelling at you to get the coat hung up. And eventually you're going to get really frustrated and you're going to break down, you're going to cry, and you're going to say, I'm out of here. The coat will never hang up. And that's when we say things like, I can never do X, Y, Z. I'm terrible at math. I will never do math. You know why we say that? Because we didn't have a coat hook somewhere. Okay? So coat hooks mean that we build on prior knowledge. Now, I've also heard people say, well, they don't have any prior knowledge. That's not true. Everyone always has prior knowledge. Babies have prior knowledge, okay? For a child to say that a whale is a fish, they have prior knowledge. Somewhere they learned about fish, okay? We always have prior knowledge. It's almost impossible to tell me a situation where somebody does not have something you can hook onto. And what I tell I have people that are training to be teachers, and what I tell them is when you're working with students, they say, I tried breaking it. Let's say they're trying to write a paragraph, okay? Well, I told them to write a sentence. Well, that didn't work. Okay, well, tell them to write a word. Well, that didn't work. Okay, then have them say it, and you write it down. Okay, well, they can do that. There is always a place to put a coat hook in. I tell you don't paint yourself into corners. There's no such thing as either or. I suppose you could argue the point and try to think of a time. But if you were to give me an example from most classrooms, I will tell you there's a place you can keep backing it out to. You have somebody who doesn't speak the language, then find a different connection. Find a picture. Find something that you can hook it onto. How many of you in memorizing something referred to mnemonic devices? Every good boy deserves fudge is one that's for music. The planets all lined up. How many of you have an example of a mnemonic device that you use? You know what I mean by that? What's a tool, a trick? Can anybody think of one? What is it? For the rainbow. Okay, so we always learned that as Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow. V, B, G, green. And you do it in the other. What did you learn it as? Vibgioy? Oh, Vibgioy. It's flipped. Oh, that's hilarious. We always have learned it as Roy G. Biv. but there's a perfect example, okay? What we're doing is we just built a coat hook. That's what we did. If I can remember Roy G. Biv and you can remember it backwards, we've just built a coat hook. Now when you go to take your test on rainbow colors, you know. And when you study color theory later on, or you're doing art later on, you remember it. Okay, and you know all of a sudden you can start to learn what complementary colors are and so on and so forth. But you started with a coat hook, okay? All right, so that's what we always do. So we always need a coat hook for the new to stick. And if you see a child or an adult or anybody in your life that's just putting that coat up there and it keeps falling down, stop yelling at it, at the kid. Stop grading them badly. Instead say, let's build a coat hook, all right? So that, and trust me, it really does work. The other metaphor I use is popcorn. And if you think of that schema that we just showed, okay, I think of popcorn only, this is a very imperfect image, but it still works for me. I think of like those neural connections that are happening as popcorn that's popping. And here's the thing about this metaphor is that you have to pretend that the lid is off, and every time a kernel hits a pile, it sets off that next kernel. And then those kernels are setting off that next kernel. And over here I've got a pop that happened, but that pop has just set off those pops and these pops. So I think a schema, like a whole bunch of popcorn popping and it's hitting all the other popcorn kernels, okay? Which means that if I only have a few kernels to start with, the popping isn't very much. But the more I have, the more it pops. Do you understand that? When we talk about whales, the more experiences kids have, the more books they're reading, even if they are pretend books, even if they are impossible books. How many of you know the story Brown Bear, What Do You See? Does anybody know that book? Well, in that, it's a very easy children's book. I do it a lot with kids in India because it doesn't demand a lot for language. But there's a purple cat in there. All the other animals have colors, red bird, yellow duck, and then you get to purple cat. So the question there is, have you ever seen a purple cat? And kids go, no. Right, it's crazy, right? So because we read that book, I now can talk about cat colors. And I can say, what cats have you seen? What color cats do you think there are? We can do all of this stuff. The more kernels we have, the more our schema pops. So when you're talking about kids from circumstances where they don't have exposure to as many opportunities, or they don't have as many books to read, or they don't have as many trips they take, you're talking about kids who may need to have that schema activated in new and different ways. And that's one of the things we can do in schools. We can show pictures. We can do all sorts of things to help pop that schema, okay? And the more we do of that, I'm a big believer in doing it through books, okay, book reading. All right, so let's keep going to one of the most important topics that I can think of in my life, which is Vygotsky. I am a huge Vygotskyan groupie, okay? This was a theory that kind of changed my entire life. Hi, welcome, thank you for being here. So this idea of Vygotsky, we're going to talk about Vygotsky for a moment. Vygotsky was a Russian theorist, educationist from the early to mid 1900s. He died quite young, and which is a shame because we always wonder what might he have added else to the world. But Vygotsky was building on other people's theories, and Vygotsky said, well, okay, I see that learning happens in the environment. I see that people are activating schema. All of that continues to make sense. But Vygotsky said, wait a minute. Everything that we learn is learned in a context. There's that word again. You're going to keep hearing it. Everything we learn is socially mediated. How is it socially mediated? Right now, I am socially mediating your learning. We learn in relation to others, and in particular, we learn from people who have more knowledge. Now, that might be a teacher, a mentor, a coach, a parent, an older sibling. It could even be somebody younger than us who's teaching us something because they have more knowledge. So all learning, arguably all learning, according to Vygotsky, happens through socially mediated experiences in relationship with other people. In relationship with A more knowledgeable other. Okay. Let's think about what that really means. What that means is that, so we're going to do another little exercise here, and I'm keeping my eye on the time. We've got time. We're okay. I want you all to hold your hands up just like this for me. Go ahead, everybody do this, please. I want to see everybody's hands up. Right here, keep your hands right up, okay? Right here, between my two hands, is what Vygotsky calls the zone of proximal development. You can keep your hands up, and I want you to go ahead and say that. Zone of proximal development.
Zone of proximal development.
I want you to say it again.
Zone of proximal development.
Zone of proximal, that means near or close or proximate development. Zone of proximal development. Now I want you to look at your lower hand. Everything below that hand is what you already know. So if we use it in terms of something like, let's say, getting dressed. You know how to put on your shoes. You know how to zip up a coat. You know how to button. You know how to pick clothes in the morning or whatever it is. You know a lot about getting dressed. When I first came to India, I had no idea how to wear a sari. Okay? So that was not in the zone I already knew. But now look at your upper hand up here. Up above here is what you can't yet know. And I'm saying yet, but it's the stuff that we do not yet have access to knowledge about. So if I were to ask you all right now to continue taking your notes for this class in Russian, is there anybody in this class that could do that? What if I insisted? What if I told you your test is going to be in Russian? Will that make you learn Russian? No, it will not. Will you, what, up here then, is that what you cannot yet access, and it's an impossible thing to ask. All right, you can put your hands down. What happens in this zone up here is what we might call fight, flight, freeze, right? I have another better slide, really, that talks about this. So I'm going to move to this one. These are the tasks the learner can do without assistance. Now, that can be for anything. It might be math. It might be adding 1 + 1. It might be getting dressed in the morning. It might be cooking. It's anything, anything. Academic. It's even true of emotions, but we won't get into that today. These are the tasks that a learner can do with assistance. That's what schooling and learning is all about. And these are the tasks that a learner cannot do even with assistance yet. Yet. There's always a yet. You could study Russian for the next 4 years and come back and take that test in Russian. Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, maybe, right? I was in a zone of fight or flight when it came to wearing a sari. In fact, one of the first events when I was in Delhi in 2016 was going to a friend's wedding. And everybody told me, just go get yourself a sari. Well, that's just so easy to say. And I'm old enough that I should know how to do that. I was with my 2 daughters who were 15 and 17 at the time, and I kid you not, I said to them, let's go see if I can find a sari. And I'm a big believer in I can do this, I have self-efficacy, I can figure this out. I go down to the sari shop, and I go in, and I realize that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know what parts go with a sari. I don't know how to figure out what those parts are. I'm starting to feel myself, I could feel it in my body starting to get very anxious. This wedding is like 3 days away, and I'm just going, there is no way I can do this. And I walked out of that shop, and I turned to my daughters, and I said, I'm outside my zone of proximal development. And my kids were like, Mom, we have no idea what you're talking about. I said, I just hit fight or flight. I'm out. And the next day, I said to one of my colleagues, I can't get a sari without help. I need help. I need assistance. I do not know how to do this. And they said, well, just go down and get it. I said, no, you're not hearing me. I'm asking for assistance. So they did, and all of a sudden I realized, gee, I not only need the sari, I need the thing called the fall, and I need a skirt underneath, and I need a blouse, and I suddenly realized, like, I could never have done that by myself. But then it came time to wear a sari, and I hired one of the people that was one of the household helps. I said, please come tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. Get me dressed, okay? I have been a very competent dresser all of my life. I mean, I can get myself dressed, right? Couldn't do it. So But now I sort of can. And now if I were told I had to go get a sorry all by myself, I probably could manage it. So when I say yet, it's because our ZPDs keep changing and changing and changing. Every time we learn something, we get higher in our ZPD. This particular, so the fight or flight zone is what we hit when we're here, and our comfort zone is here. Now we talk about wanting safe classrooms. Do we want a classroom where everyone hangs out here? No, we do not want that. Why? Why don't we want that? What is that? Why don't we want people hanging out right here in the comfort zone? No growth. You do not get growth and you do not get learning. All learning only happens in the ZPD. I'm a very big believer in this. Remember I said everything connects to schema? Everything connects to the ZPD. You do not get learning or growth. Now, that's fine to be comfortable. We could all sit here and play child's games and we'd all have a great time, but we wouldn't learn. And that's fine. It's okay to not learn all the time. You can go read a silly, fun book and not learn. But if we want learning to happen and we believe that classrooms are about learning. Now, I also don't want to throw you off that cliff, okay? So what does it look like if we're hanging out here and a student is bored? What does boredom look like in a classroom? Give me some examples. What does boredom look like? Non-attention. No participation. Low participation. What else does boredom look like? Say that again?
No energy.
No energy. Sleeping, putting your head down and going to sleep. All right. Talkative, distracting. Now let's talk about what fight or flight looks like. If you are way beyond and you just are not going to, you just keep putting that coat up and it's nothing there, what does fight or flight look like in a classroom? Maybe.
Teacher, even the students are there writing down.
Yes.
Don't know where to focus.
Right? They don't know where to focus, so it may look like distraction. What else might somebody do in fight or flight? Shut down. They might get angry. They might get angry. They might get anxious. They might shut down. They might actually put their head down and sleep. Some of the behaviors look a lot like boredom, but they're shut down instead. When we fight, we're yelling at. So I've had students at earlier ages. I think one of you were using the example of middle schoolers, right? Being very, I don't want to do this. Well, then ask yourself, have I asked them to do something that's outside their ZPD? If I haven't, if I think it's within it, then I say to students, you can do this because I've planned this very carefully to be within your zone of learning. I actually use those, I don't use zone of proximal development, but I say your zone of learning. And if you think you can't, then we need to back it out a little bit, but I think probably you can. Or maybe I really have thrown somebody off the top and I say, I didn't realize that this is more than you can do right now, okay? Fighting can look a lot like anger, it can look a lot like misbehavior, it can look a lot like all sorts of things. Fleeing can look like somebody leaving the room. Just leave the room. I told you I've had students that were very at risk who used to say to me, why don't you kick me out of the room? That's a begging for a flee, right? It's like, just let me go. And I say, how about if we come back and figure out where we lost our way? Which would make a lot more sense than telling you to leave. Because if you leave, you don't learn, okay? So this concept, I've used it as a parent. I've used it for myself. Like I said, the sorry example. I walked out and I said, I'm beyond my ZPD. And my kids are like, we have no idea what you're talking about. But that's what I was referring to. And then we also scaffold. And we scaffold instruction by saying, where do I back it out until I find that coat hook? All of these images are just images I use in my own mind to remind myself, when I see a behavior, it's telling me something. Now, it could also be emotional. You might know very well what you're doing and still be bored, or you might feel like you can't do something when you really can. So there's an emotional layer to that as well. But we're going to stop there for now with that, and then we're just going to quickly, I know I've got to wrap up here. I'm going to quickly say this. We can come back around to this in the next session as well. Critical sociocultural theory is very similar. It's still based in sociocultural, our social and cultural connections, but remember critical, we're putting the critical lens on it. And the big thing to know here is that we are really looking at how learning is influenced by our social, cultural, historical, political, religious contexts, with a focus on power dynamics, identity, and social justice. And I'm going to have an exercise for you to do later, and we're going to be talking about how we use critical theory to now ask those questions. Whose voices are heard and whose are not? Where do I stand in relation to you? All of that is critical theory. Everything we've been talking about is really about critical sociocultural theory, okay? It's asking those questions. So we're going to close the session out there. But I don't want to use up the break. They need a little bit of a break. Yeah, so can we break it now and we'll get a break? We can still take a... Okay, all right, that's fine. So you are going to get a break. Let's just wrap up this slide then here, and we'll think about what this is. And then I have an exercise for you in a little bit that's going to be that take-home exercise that you're going to come back with tomorrow, and we can start thinking about it today. So what do we say about critical sociocultural theory? So we remember what Vygotsky told us. What was that thing called again? What's the ZPD? Say it one more time. Very good. Okay. So the other thing that I believe in is the more somebody says it with their own mouth, the more they're going to absorb it into your... It's one thing to write it down. It's one thing to hear me say it. But teaching it doesn't mean you're learning it. Teaching does not mean learning. And when we talk about student-centered learning, when we're talking about all these pedagogies this week, when we talk about all these theories, the bottom line is just because it's taught does not mean it's learned. What I want is learning. So the more you say that, the more I know you're learning it. The more your brain and your body and your mouth is engaged in learning it. I also check around the room and make sure that everybody actually is saying it. I don't care if you say it slightly wrong or whatever, because that choral recitation, I'm not picking on anybody, right? But I'm making sure that nobody's dropping off the sides. I'm trying to build a coat hook that you know is safe for you and okay for you. Safety within a classroom means safe risk, right? Because you don't have the growth and the learning without mistakes. You don't have growth and learning without that movement. So critical, we take it one step further. And now, so what we've done beyond Vygotsky is to say, okay, Vygotsky's great and everything, but one thing Vygotsky didn't account for is, where's the power in the classroom? Where's the power in the curriculum? Who are we teaching? How are we teaching it? What is our philosophy? And that runs us all the way back to day one, when we thought about our philosophies in the classroom and why we believe those things, okay? And how we believe them as well. We are also a product of our social existence. We are a product of our culture. We are a product of our historical contexts. We are a product of our religious and faith-based contexts. We are a product of our economic contexts. So when we think about this, it's more than just social, cultural, historical. I always make sure to add religious, political, economic. Those are the other three I usually add. And we could probably add more. You can probably think of other ways in which we're building this context around us. And I like to use the example of a river, okay? Now, this is going to tie into an exercise I'm going to have you do in a little bit. But I think of the image of the river, and this is my, again, this is my thing. This is not something, oh, that's our break. Oh, yeah, right. I have it over here. Hold on just a second. Here. Okay. This is from a chapter that I wrote in a book, and the chapter is called Rivers and Fireworks. Fireworks kind of being like the popcorn image. Let's start. We are all in a river. We are all in a river. This is the teacher, and we're in a river that we're either born or adopted into or we move into. I am now in an Indian river. We're in multiple rivers. Remember, these are all incomplete images. But I'm now in an Indian river, so I have to learn and do some things that are very Indian in context that I don't do every day. If you came to visit me, you'd feel the same. There'd be things you might not know, foods you might not understand, dress you might not know, context, okay? I mean, I told you I come from snow. You might not have been accustomed to knowing how to dress for snow, right, with boots and coats and all that. Okay, but I teach what I know and I teach how I know to teach it. But what I know is what I've experienced and what I also have learned in my own growing up. It's also how I was taught, okay? So I am who I am. I am situated in my river of all those things that happen, my social, my context, my everything that I believe, okay? So I teach what and how I know. I know what and how I have experienced things, and I experience what our culture conveys as valuable. And then it's just, this is me, or a teacher, but me in this case, okay? Now, my river is all of the things that I've had access to, or that I've lived in, or that I can think about. And these riverbanks are the norms that get set by society. So, for example, part of my river might be, for example, getting my PhD. That's a very unique thing in my river. A lot of people may not have that. But I was able to grab that because of what? Because I had other schooling in my river. So think of me floating along my river and I grab a hold of this. Oh, books when I was little. Oh, experiences when I was little. Oh, a mom who's a teacher. That helped me a lot. But also my negative experiences might have formed some of that. Maybe my negative experiences made me stronger. Maybe they made me more resilient. Maybe I didn't have access to some things and I learned the value of money, right, or whatever it is. So it's not necessarily that I have everything, because I didn't grow up having everything. What I know is I had my river, and my river led me to being able to grab a hold of a few things. I had a certain faith. I had a certain this, a certain that. I had 3 siblings. That's part of my river. Everything I've lived in is part of my river, and that formed me. And those experiences now have allowed me to be this person to teach. But let's complicate that a little bit, and then this will be the last slide before break. Let's add this, which is multi-directional. I've only added this to my river. So in addition to me floating down this river and picking up things or whatever that's influencing me, I am also influencing the river, because I also get to kind of throw some things out. Or I get to say, I kind of want to push against this riverbank a little bit, right? I had to learn about non-binary language, which was not a thing. Well, it probably was, but I didn't know that as a child. So I can either just pick up what I know and go along, or I can also have influence on that river a little bit. And I can push against the banks a little bit. What do we do when we're in a river, like, think metaphorically? One thing I can do is float along. Ah, this is so great. I'm just going to take whatever comes along. It's just the floatiest river in the world, and I'm just fine. But sometimes we're not fine in that river. Sometimes that river is going to drown us. And when we're going to feel like we're drowning, we have to fight to keep afloat. We might find others that have similar rafts around us. We are stronger if we tie all our rafts together. That's how we start to change and push against some of the norms if we feel that we need to. And I'm not saying those norms are going to change. I'm saying these are ways we could. We can swim against the current. We can say, this current isn't working very well for me, to be honest. We could say, you know what, I actually think I want to jump rivers. Well, it's not impossible to jump rivers. You can actually put yourself into a context if you have the opportunity, right, to be able to do that. So we are influencing the river, and the river is influencing us. And now it gets even more complicated with one last image, which is that the students are also coming in with rivers. All of you also have your rivers that you've lived in, and we're all interacting, and it gets it's like schema. All of a sudden it becomes very complicated. So not only are these my teacher beliefs, values, and social reproduction, but in addition, I am also impacting my students' rivers, and they are influencing mine. Okay, and these really all overflow and intersect, and they may even be, all of these are possibilities here. But if a student's river is far outside my experience, that's where I start to have conflict and I don't understand. So when we talk about things like inclusive practices for disability, well, I don't know what it means to be blind, so I don't think I can teach that. Or maybe I just need to figure out a different way to be and to understand that river. I can either say I can't teach that, or I can say maybe this is a product of who I am and I can keep learning, all right? This river metaphor works for me. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it works pretty well for me to understand the interactions between teaching and learning, because every single one of us is in not just one river, but multiple. We have families. We have people that we have connections to. What resources do you have? Not just economic, what social resources, what capital? cultural resources do you have? Okay, all of that forms our river. Okay, and I know we need to wrap up, but we're going to end with that metaphor. Hopefully I didn't throw too much at you, but I'm going to have you do an exercise just to think about where you are going to draw your own rivers. And you're going to hand that in tomorrow, and you can do anything you want to draw your rivers. What river are you living in? And it's not your life journey, it's not a timeline per se, it's what you think is in your river that makes you who you are. That makes you who you are. And you can choose any way to do that you want to. It might be with words, it might be with images, it might be with colors, it might be with a river that bends, it may be with a river that's straight. You decide. Okay, and that'll be your exercise for tonight. So let's go back to our lessons, and we have a 15-minute break. All right, there we go.